Hello again. Welcome to the last session of Introduction to Experimental Psychology, Psych 224. Well done for going through all the sessions. This is the last one for this course. And in this session, which is session 11, I'm going to cover reading and writing of research reports. Remember when I talked about steps in scientific methodology, I mentioned the fact that you identify a problem and you formulate a hypothesis. Now, before you can formulate your hypothesis, you have to do a literature search. And doing a literature search involves a systematic and detailed search of all types of published information so that you can obtain relevant information about the specific phenomena that you are investigating. So the various sources that we can obtain information from are academic textbooks, it could be journals, it could be long essays or dissertations of students, archived information, etc., etc. So once you do a good literature search, then it sets you off to writing a research proposal. So once you've written your research proposal, then you can go ahead and conduct your study. And when you've conducted your study, then you have to write a research report in order to communicate your findings to the public. So in this session, I will focus on doing a literature search, writing a research proposal, and how to write a research report using the APA format. So by the end of this session, you should be able to outline step by step how to do a literature search. You should be able to list possible databases from which you can do a literature search as a psychology student doing research in psychology. You should be able to outline how to write a research proposal, and you should be able to distinguish between a research proposal and a research report. Finally, you should be able to outline how to write a research report using the APA format. So I'll cover how to do a literature search, writing a research report, and then writing a research proposal, and then writing a research report using the APA format. And this is your reading list. So let's look at how to do a literature search. Literature search is a systematic and detailed search of all types of published information to get relevant information about the topic that you want to investigate. And to be able to do a good research, you should do a thorough literature review. And as I mentioned earlier, there are several sources that you can obtain information when you're doing a literature search, as I have listed on this slide. So the question is, why do you have to do a literature search before you go ahead to write your proposal and conduct your study? So when we do a literature search, we are able to review information that already exists. Information about theories that have been propounded, information about current findings, critical opinions about findings, etc., etc. So it gives us information when we do literature search. Also, it helps us to form a basis for our own research. So you do a literature search. So for instance, I'm involved in a study where I want to look at the psychosocial aspect of diabetes treatment. I've done a literature search and I've noticed that a lot of the treatment for diabetes focuses on the medical aspect of the illness. But sometimes you can have psychological distress that can affect the management of diabetes and affect diabetes control. So it was upon a thorough research, upon a thorough literature review, that I noticed that actually nothing has been done on the psychosocial treatment of diabetes patients. And based on that, it informed me about my own research and how to go about my research. So here, the literature search that I did formed the basis for conducting my own research. When we do a literature search also, we are able to know what has been done so that we don't duplicate what has already been done. So imagine that you don't do a literature search and then you go ahead and conduct a study, and as you when you publish it, you notice it, or even before you publish it, in the course of conducting the study, you come across a paper that has done exactly what you have done. So when you do your literature search, as much as possible, you read almost anything and everything about your area of interest. And then you know what has been done in the past, and then you don't duplicate what has already been done. For instance, you study attitude towards same-sex relationship amongst males and females, and that is what you're interested in doing. You do a literature search and you realize that over the years, several researches have been done just like what you want to do, and they have found out that there's no difference between the two groups, and it's been concluded that no matter what, the two groups, the males and females, do not differ. So the point is, if that is the conclusion, why do you want to duplicate this research? Perhaps you would want to say that, well, all the studies that have been done have been foreign studies. Nothing has been done in Ghana or in Africa. So everything has been done in the West. So based on that, you want to conduct your study. So although you are duplicating the study, something is changing, which is the environment within which the study is being done. Again, when we do a literature search, it enables us to compare our own research findings with existing literature. And that is what you do when you write your research report and you discuss your results. You compare what you found to what has been found in the past. So in doing your literature search, you can start by doing some background reading. So you can read textbooks, you can read journals, etc., etc., just to give you a fair idea about the area that you are interested in. Then you can use the title of your study or your research questions to be able to identify what you call search words or search terms. So let's say I'm looking at psychosocial variables related to the management of diabetes. So here I have a search term such as psychosocial variables, I have type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. So I identify my key terminologies and I use that in my literature search. You can also use important authors, theories, concepts, etc. to guide you in your literature search. Then the next thing is that you identify the source where you will do your search. I mentioned that there are several sources for obtaining information. So you don't have to restrict yourself to one single source. As much as possible, explore the various existing sources. So for instance, University of Ghana BAM Library, you can go online and then access several information about your area of interest or your research question or your research topic. For psychologists, we have Medline, we have Science Direct, we have PsycInfo, etc. All these databases are available for you to do a literature search. In doing your search, you can also use the following techniques to be able to guide you to do your search. Now, one thing you can do is to avoid doing a simple search or a basic search. So usually look for the advanced search button and click on it. And with that one, you can specify exactly what you want to search. So you can search the database by inserting an asterisk at the end of what you call a stem. So for instance, if my stem word is psychology, I type in psychology and I insert an asterisk at the end of it. What it does is that automatically the system would search for all endings for the word term psychology. So you can have psychologists, you can have psychological, etc., etc. So any word that has the stem psychology in it and any literature with the word psychology and its extensions will be generated. So any information, any journal articles with the word psychological, psychology, psychologist will be generated. Because when you do your literature search, you put in your keywords and then you click search, then it pulls out for you all journals, all textbooks, etc. Depending on the type of database, every published information that has those words that you've put in, the system will pull those sources of information out for you. And then it's your duty to read and see which one is of interest to you. Another technique you can also use is to link terms together with either the connecting word "and" or the connecting word "or." When you use the connecting word "and," it narrows the search to find results that contain both terms. So if I put in diabetes and management in my search, it will generate information that combines the two terms. So I'll have diabetes and then I'll have management. On the other hand, if I put in the word "or" to connect diabetes and management, so it says diabetes or management, this will broaden the search and it will bring out any information that contains either or both terms. So whatever journal articles are generated based on my search, I will have journal articles that has only the word diabetes, those that mention only management, and then those that mention diabetes and management. So you notice that when you use "or," you generate more information than when you use the word "and." Using "and" is a bit more restricting. One thing you should notice that the database will only match on specific words that are entered. So if you enter the word using the American version, it will not translate it to the British version and find those papers for you. Another technique is also to find phrases. So if your search term is a phrase, string of words, you insert the search terms and then put quotations at the end of it. So this way, whatever information that is generated, whatever journal articles, for instance, that is generated, what happens is that the words will appear immediately next to each other because you've put the quotation marks. So for instance, if I have cancer patients, it will bring up papers that have these words appearing next to each other. In doing your search also, you can limit the dates in terms of, you can say that I want literature from 2000 to 2016, or I want literature or information from 1960 to 2000, etc. Then finally, you have to organize your results. So having done all that search and generated a lot of information, you have to organize these materials. You can create folders and put them in. So you may have your core materials and you have other materials. So you organize them in such a way that when you are looking for this information, you know exactly where to obtain it from. So this brings us to the end of literature search. Now I'm going to go on and talk about writing a research proposal. I'm going to be very brief about this because a lot of the things that are in here I will talk about when I talk about writing a research report. So as I mentioned earlier on, a research proposal outlines how a researcher intends to conduct a study. I just talked about doing a literature search, and I said that once you're able to do a good literature search, it sets you off to writing your research proposal. So as the name suggests, you are proposing, as a researcher, you are proposing what you intend to do in the conduct of your study. So for instance, what are your research questions? Who do you want to test? And how do you want to test them? How will you analyze your data, etc., etc. So the research proposal is written in future tense because it's something you are proposing to do. The outline for this is very similar to writing a research report. That is, after you've conducted your study and you've analyzed it. So the difference is the fact that for a proposal, you write it up to the method section because you are proposing what you intend to do. But for a final research report, it will include the results section and the discussion section. The research proposal will end at the method section where you say who you are testing, how you are testing them, and how you analyze your data and your expected outcome. It doesn't include the results and discussion because you have not yet collected your data. So typically for a research proposal, you would have the title of the study, the name or names of the author or authors, you'd have an abstract. This is optional. Depending on where you are sending your research proposal, some may ask for an abstract, some may not. So sometimes, for instance, if you're applying for ethics with the College of Humanities, they ask that you include an abstract. And then you have the introduction, which is the background of the study. You have a literature review session. Sometimes you put the introduction and literature review together as one. Then you have your method section. And remember, I said this is where the proposal ends. So in your method section, you're saying who you are testing, how you are testing them, etc. And then how you analyze your data and the expected outcome of the research. So let's look at how to write a research report. So this is what the report you write after you've collected your data, after you've analyzed the data, and then you know what your findings are. Remember when I talked about the steps in scientific methodology, I said it is not enough just to collect data, analyze it, and say these are my findings. And then you write a report and it's sitting on your computer or on your desk somewhere. It's important that you communicate your findings to the public, and you do so by publishing your results in a journal. And I mentioned the fact that depending on your research area, that will determine where you publish your results. So let's look at how to write a research report using the APA format. So as I've just mentioned, you write a research report in order to communicate your findings to the public. If you conduct your study and you come up with very interesting findings and you don't publish your findings, nobody is going to know what you have found. So this is the outline for writing a research report. You have a title, the names of the authors, then you have an abstract, introduction, the method section, results, discussion, and then a reference section. And then in some instances, you would include an appendix. So let's look at the title. The title of your study or your report will summarize the main ideas of your research. So basically, it should cover the main ideas of the research. By reading the title, a reader should be informed as to which variables you investigated in your study. Make sure that your title is eye-catching so that readers don't skip your report. So for instance, if you did a literature search, you look at the title and then you decide whether this is a journal article I want to read further. And so you download it to read it. So you have to make your title eye-catching and avoid the use of words that will not serve any purpose in the title. So for instance, students will write an experimental study of the effect of motivation on performance of primary school children. Here you notice that if we take out the words, the experimental study of, it will not change the meaning of the title. So these few words are redundant words. So rather we would say the effect of motivation on performance of primary school children. So you do away with a study of, an experimental study of, an investigation into, etc., etc. And APA recommends that the word length for your title should be between 10 and 12 words. The second is the name of the author or authors. So who are those who are involved in the study, the researchers? You put down their names and then their affiliation, whichever university they are affiliated to. The preferred format is to list the first name, the initials, and then the last name. So, but depending on if, let's say, you want to publish this report in a journal, depending on the journal you are sending it to, this may vary. So you have the names of the authors and then the affiliation. Now, for some journals, they will say that you need to put in the affiliation of the researchers, the affiliation where the researchers conducted the study. Others will say, put in the affiliation where the researcher is presently. So I've done research at the University of Birmingham in the UK. I want to publish my findings. I'm back at the University of Ghana, but I have to put in University of Birmingham because the requirement of the journal is that I put in the institution where I conducted the study. So depending on the journal and their requirements, this may vary. And in terms of presenting the names of the authors, you may want to present it according to the contributions that the authors made. So those who made, the one who made the most contribution will have his or her name first, and then the subsequent ones will follow. Then you have the abstract. And this is a comprehensive summary, or like an executive summary of the whole report. So the abstract in a way introduces the report. Now, if you are doing a literature search, first of all, you look at the title of the papers that you generate when you do the search and decide whether this is a paper of interest to you or not. Then you read the abstract, which is a summary of the whole report. So the abstract will tell you briefly who was the research questions, who was studied, why the study was done, and what the findings were. So based on what you read, you decide whether I want to read this whole paper or actually it's not relevant to my area, so I don't have to read the whole paper. So the abstract summarizes the whole report. And so it should include a sentence or two of each of the main sections of the report. It should have a sentence from the introduction, a sentence from the method section, the results, and the discussion section. And again, depending on where you want, the journal that you want to publish your report in, that will determine the word count for your abstract. Usually it ranges between 150 words and 300 words, depending on the journal you want to publish in. So you come to the first or the main section of the research report, which is the introduction. This is the first section of the report, and it usually begins with a description of what is already known about the phenomenon that you are studying. So a background information. And according to the APA format, the introduction is funnel-shaped in the sense that it's broad at the beginning and then it narrows down at the end. So you start by talking broadly about the area. So let's say you want to look at the psychological effects of child abuse. So you start by defining what child abuse is, why people would abuse children, what are some of the effects of child abuse, what are the possible factors that can lead to child abuse, etc. Now, when you talk about, as you talk about child abuse, you talk about the effects. So there could be physical effects, emotional, psychological, etc. So as you go on, then you narrow down and say that you are going to focus on the psychological effect of child abuse. So you start broadly and then you narrow down like a funnel. And then you follow this by the aims and the relevance of the study. As part of the introduction, you also have the literature review, where you talk about the theory that you are basing your research on. You review studies that are related to what you are doing. And at the end of it, you state the rationale for your study based on the literature review you have done. And then you state the hypothesis of your study. Let me just mention that usually when you are writing a manuscript for a journal article, you will not separate your introduction from your literature review. It's all written together as an introduction. However, for students' reports such as long essays, students' reports such as dissertations, theses, etc., the introduction is usually separated from the literature review. Then you come to the second main section of the report, which is the method section. And this, according to McBurney 2001, is the heart of the report because it tells the reader exactly what was done, and it also allows the reader to be able to replicate the study that was done. So this method section has 4 different subsections. The first one is the participant or subject section. And this describes the participants or subjects that were tested in your study. So for instance, if you tested human participants, you have to say who you tested, you have to specify how many you tested, you also have to specify their demographic variables, etc. etc. You also have to say how you selected these participants. And if any of them dropped out of the study, you need to say that, for instance, you started with 100 of them, but only 65 completed, etc., etc. On the other hand, if you are testing animal subjects, you have to mention which species you are testing, you have to name the supplier that you got the animals from, you have to name the location, among others. Then we come to the second subsection of the method section, which is the materials or apparatus. So this section describes the materials or apparatus that you use to collect your data or to measure your dependent variable. When we talk about apparatus, we are referring to any equipment that you used. So did you use a recording device? Did you use physiological devices? Did you use a one-way mirror? Did you use a glucometer to measure the sugar levels of diabetes patients, etc., etc.? You need to specify that. If you use any equipment, you need to provide the name of the equipment, the model of the equipment, and the name of the manufacturers. So where I've used the glucometer, I have to specify the name. I have to specify the model that I used, and then the manufacturers of this glucometer. And when we talk about materials, we are referring to written materials. So if you're using a questionnaire, if it's a paper and pencil test, etc., you need to state all of that. So for instance, if you use the questionnaire, you need to name the questionnaire, who developed it in what year, how many items are on it, what are the responses on the questionnaire, how is it scored, and then how reliable or valid that questionnaire is. Then the third subsection of the method section, which is the design, and the design states the research method that you used. So you can start by saying whether it was a qualitative research or a quantitative research. This section is optional. You can choose to omit it, but especially where you conducted an experiment, it's important that you state the exact design that you used. So how many independent variables did you test? Did you investigate? How did you manipulate them? How many levels did the independent variables have? Did you use a repeated measures design, or you used a between participant design? If you use a within participant design or a repeated measures design, did you counterbalance the order of the presentation of the independent variable, among others? Then you come to the last subsection of the method section, which is the procedure. And the procedure gives a step-by-step account of what both the experimenter and the participant did in the study. So in this subsection, you talk about how you recruited your participants, how many of them you recruited, and then whether you assigned them into groups, how you assigned them, did you randomly assign them, etc., etc. And then the steps you took in terms of obtaining informed consent, and if you use questionnaires, how you administered the questionnaires, etc., etc. So a step-by-step account as to how you collected your data. Then you come to the third main section of the research report, which is the results section. And in this section, you report the data that was collected and how you analyze this data. So what statistical test did you use, and what were your findings? What were the results that you obtained? Remember, at your proposal level, you proposed the statistical test that you will use. So in your final report, you are saying that, for instance, I used the one-way ANOVA, and these are my results. So you present the results in a table form, and there's a way of presenting results in a table form using the APA format. You need to familiarize yourself with that. So you present the results and you interpret your results without discussing it, because you leave that for the discussion section, which is the last section or the last major part of the research report. So the discussion interprets and evaluates the results that you have obtained. You talk about what you found, how it relates to previous studies that have been done, what are the implications of your findings, etc., etc. So it focuses on the theoretical contributions of your study to existing knowledge, and it outlines the similarities and the differences between your findings and previous findings. So for this section, you start by summarizing the purpose of your study and the expected outcome. And then you report whether or not the results that you obtained are consistent with your expectations. So remember, you had your hypothesis. In your proposal, you had an expected outcome. So were your hypothesis confirmed or not? Then you interpret your results by telling the reader what exactly they mean. So if, for instance, you found out that stress management improved diabetes control, what does it mean? If you obtained results that are contrary to what you propose, you have to explain why you obtained something to the contrary. Then again, as part of your discussion session, you discuss your limitations or the shortcomings of your study. So state any major or minor flaws in your study that if you improve upon these flaws, it will better improve the study if you are to conduct it the next time. You also discuss the implications of your findings and the practical applications of your findings. So if you find that stress management improved sugar levels of participants or people with diabetes, then the practical application is that it is important that as part of diabetes treatment, the healthcare providers will detect when participants are under stress and help them to manage their stress so that they can improve their diabetes control. Then at the end of your discussion, you have a brief conclusion. So briefly, in just a short paragraph, you state what your main findings are. From the discussion, you have your reference section. So here you provide an accurate and complete list of the references that you cited in your report. So in writing your introduction, in writing your method section, in discussing your results, etc., you may have cited some sources. So you have to reference these sources that you cited in the body of the report. You have to ensure that you don't omit any source that you have cited. Now note the difference between the reference and the bibliography. With the bibliography, you would include even sources that you did not cite in the report, but sources that you may have obtained information from. But with the referencing, you only reference the sources that you cited in the body of your report. So please take note of the difference between the reference section and the bibliography. So the APA format says that we use the referencing rather than bibliography. Then finally, you come to the appendix. At the beginning, I mentioned the fact that in a research report, you may or may not include an appendix. So for instance, if you are writing a manuscript for a journal article, you don't include an appendix. But if it's a student's report, such as a long essay, such as a thesis, etc., you'd have to include an appendix. And in the appendix, for instance, you could include the letter that states that you obtained ethics approval. You would include the questionnaires that you used, a sample of your informed consent form, etc., etc. So this brings us to the end of session 11, and it brings us to the end of our course, Experimental Psychology. I hope you have enjoyed this course. Again, I will encourage you to read more. I have provided a reading list, and I encourage you to read more. I wish you all the very best.